Hello and welcome back. Now that we have valid recipe and chef models all created, let's go ahead and create the one-to-many association between chefs and recipes. Okay, so let's take a look at the diagram again. There it is. We have chefs on the one side and we have recipes on the many side. And to make this association work, all we have to do is add this chef ID column to the recipes table. And this is going to serve as the foreign key. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that first to build association. Over here, we're going to say Rails generate migration add chef ID to recipes. Okay, this will create the migration file that we need under db migrate folder. And there it is. Let's pull it up. Okay, we're simply going to say add column. So first is going to be the table. So this is going to be to the recipes table. Okay, and then is the name of the column, which is user ID. Actually, it's not user ID, it's chef ID. Okay, if it was a users table, it would have been user ID, but since we're calling it chef's table, it's chef ID. And the type, as you know, is always going to be integer for foreign keys. All right, so foreign key is always integer. Save that. Let's run it. Rails db :migrate. Okay, perfect. Let's test it out. Rails console. If I type in recipe.all and then recipe, there you go. Now we have a chef ID of type integer. Perfect. And by convention, since we have chef ID field now in the recipes table, once I add the 2 lines of code I need for chef and recipe models, Rails is going to assume that there is a chef's table which has primary key that I'm going to reference in order to make this connection between the 2 tables. Okay, so the second part of this, I'm going to exit out of the console. The second part of this is in the chef model, I have to say, because this is the one side, has many : recipes. Okay, save that. And then on the recipe side, I have to say belongs to, belongs underscore to : chef. Okay, notice how this is singular. Belongs to chef because chef is the one side and recipes is the many side. So when I reference recipes in the chef model, I said recipes, plural. Okay, so that is it for the one-to-many association. Now let's test it out. Going to hop on Rails console. And you have to get in the habit of doing this, of jumping on Rails console any chance you make any type of model or table changes to test it out. You have to get comfortable with it. Control L. All right, so let's create a chef first. Chef equals chef.new. I'm going to say name will be Masroor, and then email masroor@example.com. Okay, I have an error. What is the error? It says unknown attribute name for chef. Okay. So I don't have name, I have chef name, if you remember. This is good to make these errors so you get comfortable writing the code. Okay, there you go. Now our chef hasn't hit the database. So one way I could have done this is I could have said at chef1 equals chef.create, and this will hit the database. Okay, let's try a different name. So we have 2 chefs. Chef name, I'll say John, and email, I'll say john@example.com. Now if I hit enter here, check it out. This actually hits the database. I have a chef John, example.com, created at, updated at. Okay, my @chef instance variable is still this in-memory object. Okay, and I haven't saved that yet. If I want to save that, now I can have 2 chefs at chef.save, and now Masroor hits the database as well. Okay, so now if I do chef.all, check it out. Okay, I have 2 chefs. Control L. All right. So now if I type in chef, okay, which is a variable, any variable, equals chef.last, it grabs the last chef from the chef's table. So if I type in chef now, I see that I have this object available to me. And this is one thing that you have to keep in mind when you reference objects. Usually what you're doing is you are wrapping the object around a row in your database. So in this case, I'm grabbing this chef object, which is the second row of my database, and I'm essentially assigning or referencing chef variable to that object, okay? So now I have a chef object, which is wrapping the second row of my database. And I can edit this also, as you saw before, by simply going something like this. Because of my getters and setters, I can simply do chef.email equals to change the email of this chef. Now, for recipe, one way to build a recipe would be recipe equals recipe.create or recipe.new and then assign it, right? However, now that I have a one-to-many association between chef and recipes, and I know recipes are going to be associated with chefs, and I have this chef object, I can do something like this. Recipe equals chef.recipes.create or chef.recipes.build. Let's try it out. I'm going to say name Italian vegetables, and then description, I can say amazing Italian vegetables cooked for 20 minutes. Okay? What happens if I do this? Check it out. Check what happened. Recipe ID nil, since it's an in-memory object, I didn't save it. But name, Italian vegetables, description, amazing Italian vegetables, cooked for 20 minutes, created at nil, updated at nil. These will be filled in when it hits the database. But check out what happened here. Chef ID 2. It automatically assigned the chef for this recipe. So I was able to basically create a recipe based on the chef building this recipe because I have the one-to-many association. Now if I do recipe.save, there you go. My recipe got saved. Now if I do recipe, it picks it up. If I do recipe.chef, it shows me the chef who created the recipe. If I do recipe.chef.chef name, it gives me the name of the recipe creator, okay, or the chef associated with the recipe. Now if I do chef, chef, okay, there's my chef. If I do chef.recipes, it shows me the recipes that this chef has. Now, since it's a one-to-many, let's go ahead and create another recipe. Now here, I'm simply gonna create a recipe first. Recipe equals recipe.new. Actually, let's do recipe.create, okay? And name, I'm gonna say vegetable saute, okay? And then description, I'm gonna say lots of vegetables cooked in oil for 15 minutes. Okay? All right, so there's an error. Something happened. What happened? It says rollback transaction, nil. Vegetable sorted, description, lots of vegetables, created at, updated at, chef ID. All right, it didn't save. It didn't hit the database. Why didn't it hit the database? If I type in recipe.errors.full messages, chef must exist. All right. So I have this requirement that a recipe has to have a chef ID, meaning a chef has to create a recipe in order for the recipe to save. Okay. Now, if I had done this, recipe equals recipe.new name vegetable saute and description lots of vegetables cooked in oil for 15 minutes. I have an in-memory recipe object. Now, if you see the chef that I have, that's chef ID 2, Mashur, right? I can do something like this. Chef.recipes, shovel in this recipe, this in-memory recipe object that I have. If I do that, then check it out. It actually inserts this recipe, hits the database, and then automatically assigns the chef ID. So now if I do chef.recipes, I get both the recipes. I get Italian vegetables and I get vegetable saute. All right, and they hit the database. If I do recipe.all, I have recipe ID 3, recipe ID 4. I have both my recipes and both of them have chef IDs associated with them. All right. Now, if you're wondering, oh, recipe IDs 3 and 4, don't worry about them. Those are automatically assigned by Rails. And remember, we had created some test recipes and then deleted them. So ID of 1, 2 are gone. And as you know, they're primary keys. So every time you create a new recipe, it's going to be a unique new ID. It's not going to be something that has been used in the database. All right. So there you go. The one-to-many association has been created. Now we have to do one more thing. We actually have to create a test for this. We have to ensure that a test is run in my recipe test that checks for chef ID to be present. Okay. Right now, if I run my test, it's going to fail. Let's try it out. Let's exit out of Rails console and do Rails test. Okay, I have errors. Recipe must be valid. Test recipe should be valid. Expected false to be true. Okay, so basically, the first test is failing. Recipe should be valid. And why is it failing? It's failing because now recipe belongs to chef. Okay, so chef has to be present in order for recipe to be valid. So by not assigning a chef ID here, this recipe instance variable is no longer valid. So let's go ahead and add @chef equals chef. Now here we have to create the chef. Okay, create bang. And we're going to say chef name, colon, we'll say Masroor. And then email, we'll say masroor@example.com. We're going to do this. And then recipe.new here, instead of that, we're going to say chef.recipes.build. Okay? If I do that and then I run my test, let's see what happens. Now if I run Rails test, check it out, everything's passing. All right? Because now I have automatically, by having chef.recipes.build, I will have a chef ID automatically assigned to this. Another way I could have done this is if I had done something like recipe.new, and over here, then I would have to say this, chef :@chef. Okay. Now, this is because I have getters and setters for chef from here. Okay. Now, if I did chef ID, if I reference the attribute directly, then I would have to give .chef @chef.id. Okay. ID to ID, object to object. So you have to be consistent in what you provided. But since we are using chef recipes build, it's automatically getting the chef ID. All right, save that. So now our code is working exactly as we want, and the test is up to date, and the one-to-many association is working. Okay. Now, if you want, you can add in a test here. Test recipe without chef should be invalid. Okay, you can do @recipe.chefid equals nil. Okay, and if you do that, then assert not @recipe.valid. Okay, what this is saying is if the chef ID turns to nil, meaning the chef associated with the recipe disappears, the recipe should be invalid. And this should pass because we have the one-to-many association and it's working as we expect. So if I type in Rails test, there you go. Whoops. We have a problem here. It says recipe without chef should be invalid. Expected true to be nil or false. Ah, okay, I see what happened. We actually, and this is great, this is actually good that we created it this way because we were able to catch this. We have left out a validation, all right? By writing this test, we have caught that we have left out a validation. And the validation is in your recipe model, you have to explicitly write this. Initially, in the test, it's creating the recipe with the chef ID, and then it's making it nil. So at creation it's working, but then you're setting it to nil. Is the recipe still valid? Okay, so at that step it's failing. Okay, so here we're gonna have to say validates chef ID, so colon chef ID presence colon true. Okay, now we're explicitly saying that chef ID needs to be present at all times, regardless of when this is run. So this should work now. Let's go ahead and run this. Rails test. Perfect. Now it's working. Okay, so now when we are actually making the chef ID nil, it's no longer a valid recipe. Okay, perfect. So let's go ahead and commit our changes. So git add -a, git commit -m, and we're going to say add one too many association between recipe and chef. Okay, now git push to push our code to our GitHub repository. Perfect. And that's all I want to cover in this video. And in the next video, we're going to start looking at RESTful routes and see how those work. And we've already worked with them a little bit when in our to-do app, we did resources to-dos. Okay, but now we're going to dive into more detail and see exactly what's happening there. See you there.